Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Hey, my name is Curtis, and as awkward as it can be, today we're going to have a conversation about sex. Yay! And just for lots of extra fun, I've decided to invite my in-laws here this morning. No, super glad. Hey, we're glad that you're here hanging out with us this morning. Special welcome if you're hanging out with us online. Go ahead and grab your Bibles and open up to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. If you don't have a Bible that you feel like you can read and understand, there's paperback ones at the end of the rows. Grab those suckers, pass them down, and feel free to take one of those home with you and make it yours. So once again, today's sermon is PG-11. I think the things that we're going to talk about are probably most beneficial for those in our middle school and high school ages, as well as those who are not yet married. Today we are talking specifically about sex in marriage, but I think some of our application and the wisdom that we're going to look at today is probably best learned now at a young age. But I'll totally leave that up to you, and so feel free to go and take your kids and check them in to Mo Kids. Now, back in May of last year, May of 2018, I got a text from a guy who's become a good friend of mine, a guy named Clint. He owns a CrossFit gym in Twinsburg, and I've been going there and working out with him, and me and him have become pretty good friends. And he texted me in May asking me if I would do a competition with him, a CrossFit competition with him in September of last year. And through a lot of nervousness, self-doubt, insecurity, kind of texting back and forth with him and just being honest with you against my better judgment, I accepted, because it was honestly a real big honor for me, because he's a really good athlete, and I really love working out with him, and so for him to ask me to be part of his team felt like a really cool thing. And now typically we do one conditioning workout a day, and it just absolutely kicks my butt. Now, a competition, which I'd never done before, is at least 3 to 4 competitions, all back to back to back. And as they started kind of the weeks coming up to it, they would release the workouts. And there was going to be 3 workouts. They released the first 2 workouts. In both workouts were movements that I could not do. I just physically was not able to do them yet. I'm not strong enough, didn't have enough endurance. And so I was like, okay, I've got to solve this problem. These are the things that I clearly have to work on. And then also, in the weeks leading up to it, they released the 3rd workout. Now, the 3rd workout had movements in it that I knew that I could do. I could do all the movements, no problem. There were movements that we did on a regular basis in regular workouts, but it was weights that we didn't typically use. It was a little bit heavier than we typically would use. So in preparing for the competition, I focused solely on the first 2 workouts because they had movements in it that I knew that I could not do. The 3rd workout, I never even practiced, because it had movements in it. I was like, oh, I've got this. It's a piece of, not going to be a piece of cake. It's going to be a difficult workout, but at least I know I'm able to do everything within the workout. I'm not going to be holding my team back. So I want to show you the workout here real quick, the 3rd workout. This is the one that I did not practice, and it was a team. There was a team of 4 of us, okay? 2 guys and 2 girls. And the 3rd workout, so after the other 2, it went like this. You had 25 minutes. All 4 of you were going, and you had to do 90 synchronized wall balls. Now, 1 guy and 1 girl was going at a time during the wall balls. What happens is the guy has a 30-pound medicine ball. You have to squat, and you have to stand up, and you have to throw the 30-pound medicine ball to a 10-foot mark, which it bounces off the wall, then you catch it, and you squat it back down. 1 guy and 1 girl are going at the same time. It has to be synchronized, and each time they throw the ball and catch it, it's considered 1 rep. You had to do 90 of those. Right. So, after you do 90 of those, then you do team synchronized box jumps. Now, this is a box, and this is 24 inches. This is what the guys had to jump to. This was the only movement in the entire workout where all 4 team members were going at the same exact time. And what you had to do is you'd stand, all 4 of you'd be on the bottom, and then you would jump. And I was really nervous about that part of the match. I considered tripping on purpose because that would be a lot of fun if I were to, but anyways, so then you have to jump up on the box, and you have to stand with your knees fully extended, all 4 of you at the same time. And you had to do 30 of those. And you'd get back down, jump back up. So you do 90 wall balls, 30 team synchronized box jumps. Then you would go back to just 1 guy and 1 girl, doing 60 synchronized thrusters. A thruster has a barbell that's 120 pounds. You squat, you stand up, and you hold the barbell completely overhead 60 times. And then you do 70, you go back to wall balls, and then you do 30 team synchronized box jumps, and you do 45 synchronized overhead squats. You hold the weight over your head and you squat it. 60 wall balls, then back to 30 team box jumps, and then you end with 30 clean and jerks, where you take the weight up to your chest and then push it over your head. Now, that was the workout. You had 25 minutes to get all of that done. Right. So, now, what makes Clint, my coach and teammate, makes him so good is he's been doing this for a long time. And so, he's got a lot of wisdom behind this, and Clint always has a plan for his team based on the team's strengths and weaknesses. Now, I look at this, and I think of all these things, and I was scared of those. The wall balls, the thrusters, the overhead squats, because that was weight that we did not typically do. We jump on a box all the time. So we circle up before this like we normally do, all four of us, and Clint starts to give us our game plan. He says, all right, guys, the most difficult part of this workout is going to be the box jumps. And in my head, I went, are you kidding me? You see this? You know this is a 120-pound barbell? We're getting a 30-pound medicine ball. We're going to be, like this all the time, like 100 gazillion times. The box jumps, we do that. That's not going to be, I'm thinking this in my head. And while I'm thinking this in my head, Clint says, all right, guys, the hardest part of this workout is going to be the box jumps. And then he turns and he looks at me and he says, Curtis, you will set the pace on the box jumps, as if I'm going to be the weak link in this part of the thing. And I look back at Clint and I said, Clint, dude, I'm not worried about the box jumps. I think that's going to be the easiest part of the workout. To which Clint said, I need you to focus on the box. I said, Clint, I don't need to focus on the box. That's going to be the easiest part. I said, I think those are going to be the most difficult part, Clint said. I said, dude, I think you're wrong. Clint said, I think that will be the most difficult part of the workout. And I said, Clint, I promise I will be fine on the box jumps. That will be the easiest part. I promise. Clint said, I don't think so, but just remember, you can set the pace there. To which I said, sure, but I will be fine. So it comes our turn. The workout starts, and I discovered very quickly how little I know about my body and what it can handle. Now, I did not know in preparing for this message, I went back to try and find this graphic to show you what the workout was. And what I discovered is they had photographers there that day, and they were taking pictures. And I have a picture that I want to share with you this morning of my team doing the box jumps. I'll give you 3 guesses who this person is, and the first 2 don't count, right? This is my whole team right here, and there's me huffing over the box like this. And I can tell you exactly what I'm thinking in that moment. While I'm standing here like this, I'm going, oh no, he was right. This is awful. Why the heck did I think I could do this? This is so tough. I'm never going to be able to finish it. This is hard. Why did I ever agree to do this? Now, see, in this moment, I realized the truth. Okay, now, this isn't a truth that's going to surprise you. This is the truth we all know. But in this moment, I realized just how true it was. And that is that promises do not compensate for a lack of preparation. Promises do not compensate for a lack of preparation. You see, I can promise you till I'm blue in the face about all kinds of things. I can promise you that I'm going to teach you how to sing. But you know, and I know because you have heard me sing, that I cannot teach you how to sing. I can promise and promise and promise and promise and promise, but that promise does not help me prepare you, or prepare myself even, to help you sing, right? I can promise you that in 2 weeks, when I'm back here at this campus, the next time I'm preaching, that I will preach to you in French. And I could go back and for 2 weeks study French a lot. And in 2 weeks, I'd come back, and you know and I know that I would not be able to speak to you in French. In fact, I could probably barely even fake an accent. And it's because the promises does not mean that I am prepared. Promises do not compensate for a lack of preparation. And every one of you in the room would be like, preacher, we get that. Yep, totally get it. Wouldn't expect you to be able to do that. I get what you're saying. And yet, here's the thing, and this is where the rub comes in. We do this all of the time when it comes to our sex lives. We do what we want leading up to the wedding day, and we assume that all of a sudden we can flip a switch, right? We assume that when we promise I do, it automatically means we will be able to follow through. But you know, and I know, and we know together that that's not at all how things work. Because promises do not compensate for a lack of preparation. And so what do? Today we're going to look at some wisdom in the Bible that God offers us. Specifically, we're going to talk about sex within marriage, but this wisdom that we're going to look at I think is useful for all of us. And one of the main reasons is it is given to us by a single guy named Paul. And Paul was a great leader in the church. He was a great leader in Christianity. And what he would do is Paul would go around in the known world at the time, and he would start churches in different cities. And when he would move on to the next city to start another church, he would often write letters back to check on them and how they were doing. And in those letters would give them wisdom on what it looks like to really love God and love people and make disciples who make disciples. And one of the cities that Paul started a church was in a city called Corinth. And so we're going to read today out of a letter that Paul writes to the church in the city of Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And it starts like this. Got some cool things to learn right off the bat. 1 Corinthians 7:1, page 927, reads like this in our Bibles. Paul says, "Now, for the matters that you wrote about," and we're going to pause for just a quick second. Here we learn something really cool. And what we can see from the context of this letter, when you kind of space things out, you kind of really see what Paul's saying here, is we find out that Paul has already written a letter to the church in Corinth. And he writes a letter to them, and they read it, and while they're reading this letter, it apparently raises some questions for them. And so what they do is they actually sit down and they write a letter back to Paul. Now, we don't have Paul's original letter because we don't have any original manuscripts, verified manuscripts, but we do know that Paul wrote a letter based on some of the things he says in 1 Corinthians. And when he writes to them and it raises questions, they don't just kind of sit around and just kind of go with what they assume Paul would say. They write a letter back. And Paul has apparently gotten their letter with their questions, and so Paul writes another letter that ends up being 1 Corinthians in our Bible to answer their questions from his original letter. Does that make sense? So this is what Paul goes on to say, and here he's talking specifically about sex and marriage. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. "Now for the matters that you wrote about in that original letter that I sent to you, and you sent back to me," he says, "now for the matters that you wrote about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman." See, that's what they thought. They thought from this letter that he originally wrote, it's good for a man to not have sexual relations with a woman. So Paul says back, "But since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband." And if you go back and you read that first part of verse 1, it seems like the church in Corinth had the same impression that many of us do when it comes to sex and God and sex and church, sex and Christianity. Summed up, it would be don't. They had the impression that Paul was telling them don't. Don't have it, don't think about it, don't even want it. And Paul writes back to kind of correct that immediately and says, whoa, wait a minute. Something I said in my letter makes you think I said don't have sex, period. And Paul says, whoa. That's not quite what I was saying. And then he goes on to give some pretty weighty instructions on what sex is supposed to look like in marriage. He says each man should have sex with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. It's mutually exclusive. That sex is supposed to be within marriage and marriage only, and that's where it's supposed to stay, between husband and wife, married. And here's the deal. None of you are surprised by that, right? That's exactly what we've come to expect religion to teach us about our sex life, what we've come to expect religion would teach us about sex. But I want to point something out to you because we just can't stress this enough. And I know our lead minister, Dan, spoke about this a little bit last week. The culture in which Paul was writing this letter was just absolutely revolutionary for him to write this. And historically, this is really important for us to know. Historically, religion is not for marital fidelity. It's not. It's not, especially during this time. Now, Christianity has been and always will be different. This was so different. This was so different than what they were living in and what society was telling them to do. In fact, back when this letter was written, religions, pagan religions, the other religions besides Christianity, were telling people to run rampant with all kinds of sexual experiences. The religions not only would teach, but would celebrate all kinds of sexual expression. As much as you can, with whomever or whatever you can, prostitutes, temple prostitutes, everything. And Corinth is this Greek city, and what we know from this time in Greek history is that historically they did not care, and they especially did not encourage marital fidelity, keeping sex within marriage between a husband and a wife. It was actually the complete opposite. And in the middle of that exact culture, Paul writes and he gives us some wisdom from God, and he says, whoa, 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 whoa. All right, I'm not saying to not have sex, but I'm also saying I know you enjoy sex, and sex is good, and it should be great, but only between a husband and a wife. And I think what God is trying to reveal to us here is that romance is fueled. And you know this, right? I mean, you know this if you've been in these, like a relationship like this, you know romance is fueled by exclusivity and by trust. Like that's what breathes life into the relationship. God is showing that it's fueled by exclusivity and trust. And see, here's the thing. I think we could end up falling into this trap of wanting to treat sex like it's just physical, right? Like sex is just physical, and it's not that, it's just physical, right? Like it's kind of like this mode that we fall into. But sex is not just physical, and I think God's trying to like show us that here, and we know that deep down. We know sex is powerful, right? There's more to it than just being physical, right? If sex is just physical, if sex is just physical, why is it that often people's biggest regrets in their life is often sexual, right? If sex is just physical, why is that so often people's biggest regret? If sex is just physical, then why is it when someone comes to me after service or maybe in an email or something like that and they say, Curtis, I want to tell you something that I have never told anyone in my life. Why is it that I know that they are about to reveal to me something about their sexuality? Right? Because we know this. Sex isn't just physical. And that's why I think God tells us to make it exclusive between husband and wife, because sex is powerful. It goes so much deeper than just physical. It ties into our spiritual. And so I've really got two sections to this sermon. And the first is a question that I think we all need to answer. I think the question is going to benefit more our middle school or high school students, or those of you who are not married yet but maybe someday hope to be. And then the second, an application for those of us who are married in the room or will be married here shortly. And so the first application, the first thing I think that we need to talk about is a question. And the question is going to come as a curveball, and we're going to explain it a little bit. But our first step to having great sex is answering this question. And the question is, what does your name smell like? Yeah. I want you to write that down, or maybe just tuck it away in the back of your brain, because we got to unpack this a little bit. So to unpack this and explain what this is, we need to go to a book in the Bible called Song of Songs. Song of Songs in your Bible, I want to tell you a little bit about it. It's on page 547. This book falls into the wisdom and poetry sections of our Bible, the poetry genres of the Bible. It's written by a guy named King Solomon about love that he feels for the love of his life, a woman. And he writes this song, and he says that he calls it the Song of Songs, like the best song that he writes. And the book is racy, but it expresses deep, passionate love that's felt between a man and a woman. And in Judaism, boys aren't allowed to read this book in their Bibles until they're 13. One rabbi teaches that a man shouldn't read it until he's married because that's just how racy it is. When you read the whole thing, I've got my own personal outline of the Song of Songs, and if you were to read through it from beginning to end, it goes like this. It goes desire, dating, defer, and then dang. Because it just gets super racy. But it goes, you see a man and a woman meet each other, and their passion for each other grows, their desire for each other grows. And they begin to date, and then one of them tries to sleep with the other before marriage, and it ends in this big fight, but they're able to work it out. And then in the text, they talk about in explicit details the first 2 times that they have sex. And we see a man and a woman meet each other and want each other and love each other and lead each other and then eventually get each other. And the Bible uses words like wonderful and right and good. But before they get to the great sex, they start with something else, and it's what our question comes from. Song of Songs, verses 2 and 3, says this. It says, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. Translation, I get drunk on you. Pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Your name is like perfume poured out. No wonder young women love you. Now, when you go through and you read this in your Bibles, whether you're in the apps or you're in paperback Bibles, you're going to see 3 words appear in sections of the paragraph in italics. And the 3 words that you'll see are either he, she, or friends. And what that's letting us know, it's indicating that that's the person singing that section of the song. The song underneath of that is who's singing that song. And so here we see that she is singing this. She sees this man that she's falling in love with. And she sees him and she says that he's a good man, he's a good-looking man, and he's a good-smelling man. And we got to do some explaining here. See, in Solomon's day, people didn't bath as often as we do now. They didn't have the soaps, they didn't have the clean water. And so what they would often do to cover up their BO is they'd lather themselves up with perfumes, lotions, and oils so that they would smell nice. And in verse 2 and the beginning of verse 3, she's saying, I look at you and I see a good-looking man. And when I get near, like I see you're a good smelling man. And so the first application that we got to talk about this morning is middle school boys, it's time to start wearing deodorant. And girls don't think it's cute when you fart. And when you're 30, they still don't think it's cute when you fart. But look what she goes on to say in verse 3. We got verse 3 up here again. Look what she says. She says, pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. And here's where the poetry, she says, your name is like perfume poured out. No wonder the young women love you. Now what she's saying here, she says you look good, you smell good, but your name is the most attractive thing about you. And when she says your name there, she's meaning your character, what you're known for, his integrity. That's what he's known for. Now see, building a marriage on someone with good, godly character is not only the foundation for a great marriage, it is also the foundation for great sex. A mentor that I really look up to, a preacher, a guy named Carl Cool, he says it like this. He says, what I know from my years of marriage is what makes a person attractive is not how they look when you see them, but how they act when you don't. Now look what goes on but how do you know, right? Like how do you know what your name smells like? How do you know this? So look what she goes on. Look what happens in verse 4. In verse 4, when you look in your Bibles and the apps, the friends be in italics. And so she says this in verse 3, you're a good-looking man, you're a good-smelling man, but your name is the most attractive thing about you. And then immediately after that, verse 4, her friends see, and they say this, she says, we rejoice and delight in you, we will praise your love more than wine. Now typically, we edit out like these footnotes whenever we're going to put a verse up on the screen, but I left this one today because I wanted to draw your attention to it. And in your Bibles or in the Bible apps, if this footnote is there and you go see what this footnote says, the footnote says that this word right there, you, that's translated, is singular and masculine. And what that means for us is significant. What that means is her friends, her friends see the man that she's falling in love with. And not only do they agree with that he's a good-looking man, he's a good-smelling man, but that he's a man of integrity. That he's a man of integrity. Her friends look at this guy and they say, man, we love your love because that's a man of integrity. That's a man that I would want to date my friend. And so if you're dating, I think a question that you got to want to ask and you need to ask, you kind of got to force yourself to ask is, what do your closest, good, godly friends say about him or her? What do your closest, good, godly friends say about him or her? You see, there's all kinds of boxes that we want to check off when it comes to someone who we could potentially marry. You know, what do they look like? What's their family background? And all of those things are good at appropriate times, but the first box that we got to check off is character. It's character. And the way Song of Songs would say it is, what does his or her name smell like? Now, I recognize for some of us in the room, you may have already passed that point of no return, right? You know, you're married, and you feel like, man, she promised that she would, or he promised that he would, or maybe you're the one that messed up in the relationship. And here's the hope for you this morning, is God can change a person's character. God can change a person's character. God specializes in helping you clean up the mess. And if you don't feel like your name smells good, I promise you, God can help that change. And I know that may not be as hopeful as you were hoping for, but God going to work on you is so much better than anything we could do on our own anyway. I have seen God fix some of the most broke and hurting marriages, but it all comes back to both people being willing to live out godly character. You can't change your spouse, but you can pray. And you can trust and live out godly character the best that you can and show what it means to love, forgive, and give grace to your spouse in a way that perhaps maybe they will begin to want godly character as well. So, my charge for you, you go be the best dang husband or wife, godly husband or wife that you can possibly be, and let God go to work on your spouse. I want to give you a proverb this morning that I think will help specifically with this application. The cool thing about Proverbs, most of them are written by the same guy who writes the Song of Songs, Solomon. And Solomon in Proverbs 14, he says this, verse 15. This is a good, easy thing to memorize. Proverbs 14:15 says, the simple believe anything, but the prudent give thought to their steps. He says the simple here is, oh, you know what, I'd kind of figure it out, right? The simple don't give thought where they want to be. They have no goals. They don't look, they don't realize that the best predictor of their future is by taking a look at their past. The simple don't believe that today helps set up their future. The simple would say, oh, what's the matter? I'll do what I want now, when I want, with who I want. I'll find happiness, exclusivity, and romance someday, and none of what I do now will affect where I want to be. But the prudent understand that life is connected, that the best indicator of the future is by taking a look at someone's past, because the prudent give thought to where they want to be, and then they go live that way. The prudent give thought to where they want to be, and then they go live that way. And so maybe where you're at this morning, maybe what you need to hear this morning is, I want you to set today as a demarcation, right? Maybe today is the day where you want to determine the story that you want to tell in the future, and then you go live that way. So if you are sitting down and you end up having a conversation someday with a fiance, you can say, I started that day and I prepared myself for you. Got to start with the end in mind. The prudent give thought to their steps. Men, husbands in the room, that means we have to decide to trust God, right? Guys, for us specifically, we have got to be men of character. We've got to make our name smell good. And I think the most important thing that we need to hear is that means we have to dump the pornography. I would even say cut the racy TV shows. You cannot cherish the woman that you are married to or the woman that you will marry and be lusting after some digitally enhanced image. Do whatever you have to do. Change your phone. Don't take your phone with you. Don't set it at the nightstand at night. Get rid of the apps. Stop watching those shows. Abby and I, my wife and I, we vet every TV show we go to IMDb, the Parents Guide. And we read whether or not there's sex and nudity in it. If there's nudity in it, it doesn't make the cut. But and so I haven't seen a lot of the TV shows that I see and hear people bragging about. But to be honest with you, we've decided to trust God, and a 45-minute TV show is not worth me celebrating my 60-year anniversary. And being honest, having great sex along the way, it's just not worth it. Middle school, high school boys, do not watch pornography now and think that when you are married, you can cut it out because you will be having sex. It does not work that way. You have got to be men of character, and you want to start now. Make your name smell good. Ladies, wives, and we husbands, we men, we have to feel like you believe that we are winning. We have to believe that you feel like we are winning. You have got to stop ripping on your husband or your boyfriend publicly. I get it. We are not good. We are not good more often to you than we should be, than you deserve. But when we hear about you bragging on us in some way, it breathes life into us like you could not possibly imagine. And I hear you. If he would just do something worth bragging about, I get it. Man, my challenge, though, is find something, no matter how small. Find something and brag on him about it. And then find something else and brag on him again and brag on him again and brag on him again. I want you for the next 7 days to do absolutely nothing but encourage your man. And come back to me and tell me you don't see a difference in his demeanor 7 days from now. Great sex starts with character, and character starts way before you ever get into the bedroom. Make your name smell good. It's not going to happen overnight, but you can begin to live out God's wisdom in your life and see what a difference it can make. And the second thing, we're going to wrap up here quickly. Paul goes on and he gives some extremely practical advice for great sex within marriage. He says this, he goes on, 1 Corinthians 4, he says, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. And in the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. The best way that we have talked about this in the past is that the best marriages are submission competitions, right? A race to the back of the line. The idea that we want to try and serve each other out of love, not to win or hold it over the other, but a willingness to serve each other breeds a team in marriage that will be happier and will be absolutely unbeatable. And so Paul, though, here in 1 Corinthians 7, he is specifically talking about marriage. And one of the lies that we're fed by culture in media is that sex with just one person becomes lame or boring, and that marriage is where sex goes to die. But check out what the stats actually say. A landmark study titled Sex in America, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, it reported that the people having the most extremely satisfied sex are monogamous married couples. Married couples are twice as likely to make love than their cohabiting counterparts or those living together. 48% of husbands say sex with their wife is extremely satisfying, as opposed to just 36% of cohabiting men, which leads to the conclusion that marriage actually helps breed intimacy, not kill it. But marriage comes with all kinds of extra stressors, right? Bills, conflicting work schedule, kids. So look at Paul's next wisdom. 1 Corinthians, verse 5. Do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. And the next slide. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. The most important thing, Paul, like in the middle of this thing, says something so incredibly important, and it kind of catches you by surprise, because I don't know that it's something we think about doing. So go ahead and put the next slide up there. The most important part that Paul says here is, go ahead, put the next slide up. It says, do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. If you have mutual consent, what does that mean that you've had? A conversation. You've talked about this. So my application for those of you who are married in the room or will be married shortly is when you are married, early in your marriage, you need to have the talk. When was the last time that you had the talk? Great sex within marriage requires you to talk about your wants, your needs, and your desires for sex. I read a book preparing for this message. I really just planned on just starting to read it to see if it would be a good resource, and I ended up reading the whole thing. The book's called Crazy Good Sex. It's written by Dr. Les Parrott. He's a Christian and a clinical psychologist. I started the book Monday afternoon. I finished it Wednesday by 11, and I didn't read the book at all on Tuesday. Short book, but really good book. Written specifically to men. He wants to thwart kind of the 6 myths that we tend to believe about sex. And here's a quote from the book that I want to read you. It says, one of the questions I often get from men when I'm talking in a seminar is, how often does a typical married couple have sex? It says, fair enough, I understand the curiosity behind the inquiry, but the answer can cause some couples to simply check sex off their to-do list. There is no prescription, no magic number for married couples. The question of frequency will be answered uniquely in terms of concern for the needs and desires of both you and your wife. It says a, quote, national average is of little help. You may be doing it 5 times a week, but if the sex is just so-so, what's the point? My former professor, Lewis Smead, says in a book, Sex for Christians, the moral issue is never how much sex, but whether physical sex is being integrated into a pattern of personal dedication. What happens between the times is more important than how many times. In other words, if you're concerned about keeping the sexual fires burning, don't count how many times you're striking the match. Just enjoy the warmth of knowing and meeting each other's sexual needs and desires. And here, Dr. Parrott is echoing wisdom that we get from Paul, that he's given to us from God in his Bibles. How do you know? You need to have a conversation. You've got to have the talk. You've got to talk about your wants, needs, and desires for your sex life. And so here's some tips Dr. Parrott gives for having this conversation with your spouse. He says, first, bring it up when you have time and when you're not having sex. Seems like a good idea, you know. Second, he says it needs to be a two-way street. He wrote this book to men, so he says this. He says, you need to not only be telling her about some of your desires, but also genuinely interested in hers. Don't be shy about telling her what you like, what you don't like. He says, be gentle here. The goal is to make things better, not hurt feelings. And what you would like to try. Ask questions of your wife the same, what she likes, what she doesn't like, and what she would like to try. He says, finally, if something is brought up that one of you is uncomfortable with, respect that and move on. And then he encourages you. He says, I cannot tell you how important this is. If you are uncomfortable talking, write it down and consider emailing each other. It takes a little longer, but the conversation has to happen. He finishes this section of the book. He says, I've got to tell you this simple suggestion of talking to your wife about what you both want in your love life at this stage in your marriage is almost always rewarding. And so that's my application for you today, is have or at least begin sometime this week that conversation. And it's not surprising that so much of having great sex and a great marriage comes back to communication. Talking to each other about love seems like it should be the easiest thing for you to do, right? But so often, with everything else that gets introduced into life, it easily and quickly becomes the most difficult thing. I really honestly thought that jumping on this box was going to be the easiest thing in the workout. But mixed in with everything else that was going on, it quickly became the worst. It quickly became the toughest. And so I want to put this picture, it had me sucking wind and like I was going to blow chunks, right? And so I went and looked to see if I could find a picture that was a little bit, from a further back part of the gym, and there wasn't. But I wish there was, because if you could expand this picture just a little bit, in fact, it's literally like right here on the other side of this cage, what you would see is you'd see my wife, my beautiful bride, my 3 daughters, all wearing my husband rocks, my daddy rocks shirts. And you'd also see some of the guys I work out with on a regular basis, like Coach Mason. And if we had a video of it, you'd be hearing things like, go, Daddy, go, you've got this. You'd hear Mason, come on, Curtis, one more jump, one jump at a time. And in that workout, that was exactly what we did. We took it one jump at a time. Now, look, relationships in general are difficult, and marriage has got to be the one with the most stress thrown into it, and where communication will be the most important. You have got to have a team of good, godly people that will stand around with you, cheering you on. And my hope is that this week, maybe for the very first time, you would be willing to go to a Mo group, or groups of people that meet in someone's home. We get to know each other and cheer and challenge each other on as we try to do this. And from there, you'll find a team of people who will cheer you on, and cheer you on not just to make it through, but also to help make it awesome.